Welcome, everybody. We're going to give the room just a minute or two to fill up, and then we'll get started. All right. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for attending our four-part series. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca Poole, and I am CNYC's Director of Membership and Communication. We have recorded this series, and we're in the process of putting it up on our YouTube channel. And as soon as we do, we'll let you know so that you can view the recordings. So we'd like to just remind everyone that our annual conference is coming up on November 12th, where we have 42 classes for you to choose from, as well as a plenary session. Members can send one person for free. Others pay a nominal fee. The registration closes on November 9th. So if you'd like to go, please sign up as soon as you can. And in addition, throughout the year, we also offer discussion groups and classes. You can visit them on our website. We have so many people to thank for their help with this series, especially our presenters and our speakers. We have a bunch of great speakers here for you tonight, and the many elected officials who helped us publicize it. Finally, we've had technical support from Local 32BJ throughout the series, and tonight we thank Tom Thering for his assistance. Once again, we have a very full agenda on a very important topic, getting assistance to pay for your projects. To keep the class moving, we're going to ask you to put your questions in the Q&A. And this time, our speakers have arranged some time at the end to answer them live. We'll also type in answers. And for those that we don't get to, we will email them to the correct parties. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for tonight, who helped pull this class together, Matt Resnick. Matt serves as ACAM's Senior Director of Project Management. With over 40 years of industry experience, ACAM has consistently raised the bar in property and project management. Matt and his dedicated team specialize in guiding boards and property owners through the entire life cycle of capital projects, from the initial concept to successful completion. Matt?
Yes, and thank you for having us tonight. So, when we were asked to present on the topic, on your way, funding, supervising, and evaluating projects, we realized that, wow, it takes a huge team to do so. It's a comprehensive effort. And so, due to that, there'll be a number of people participating tonight, explaining what they do, and you're going to kind of see the life cycle that we go through from beginning to end for evaluating a energy efficiency project based on Local Law 97. So yeah, we hope you leave here tonight understanding how to search for rebates, funding, how to supervise your project, and most importantly, how to tap into financing and rebate opportunities and select the best projects for you based on a unique engineering evaluation of your building. So if we were to jump to the agenda, very quickly, we'll do some introductions. The first step in that process I was just describing, you'll hear from Matt Sabula, who's going to tell you about the recent Local Law 97 updates. We then have a member of NYSERDA's FlexTech program who's going to explain that. We'll walk through what an actual FlexTech engineering report unique to your building looks like. And then we're going to hear about the great ways to help offset some of the costs from National Grid, as well as how to finance these projects. So we could formally introduce the team. We have Matt Sabula, the Senior Director of Energy, one of my colleagues at ACAM. We have Bill Dubeck, who runs the multifamily NYSERDA program, and you'll learn a lot more about that today and why it's so great in helping offset some of the costs of those engineering studies. Mike Scarano, founder and engineer of Empower Group, Carolyn Scabelli, who is the lead program manager from National Grid, and Andrew Chintz, who is a financing specialist with NYC Accelerator. So again, the first thing we need to do is understand for a building, where do you stand in Local Law 97? And to that, I'll let Matt Sabula update everyone on recent changes to the law and their impact to you.
Thank you, Matt. As Matt mentioned, we're here to provide guidance to our clients. And the first thing we need to do is understand what the law is and how it impacts the properties that we manage. So just a quick refresher on what is Local Law 97. So it's a part of the Climate Mobilization Act. A lot of people like to call it the centerpiece of the Climate Mobilization Act. It applies to buildings over 25,000 square feet. That's roughly 50,000 buildings across New York City. It mandates carbon caps, which become more rigorous as we move down the timeline of that law. And the end goal of Local Law 97 is net zero emissions by 2050 for all of New York City. This law requires annual reporting, similar to what you do with your Local Law 84 benchmarking. Every building which is covered by Local Law 97 will have to submit an annual emissions report. The law also carries heavy penalties for exceeding carbon emissions, as well as failures to file those annual reports. The chart below, it just really illustrates why the city is going after buildings. These are carbon emissions based on the 2021 data from the city. The first bar that you see in that graph is emissions coming from buildings and real estate. So in September of 2023, which was roughly a month ago, the DOB came up with their second Local Law 97 rules update. That's the first time we heard from the DOB since November of 2022. And this was not only a rules update, we've also gotten kind of a sense of what is the mobilization part for 97, and the DOB discussed different ways of them making sure that there's financing for various projects that on both the state and federal level. They're shoring up resources. I know we have the accelerator on here with us, which is one of the great resources available to all of buildings affected by Local Law 97. And then they're also looking for feedback from building owners, vendors on what has been done so far, what's working, how they can improve this approach to a law, which is pretty much starting next year. So some of the major rule changes, we can stick to the previous slide for a second. So some of the major rule changes are the outline for good faith efforts, which have been getting the most attention after the rule updates were released. There's a new credit for beneficial electrifications or early electrifications measures. It sets out penalties for non-compliance at the maximum amount under the law. We also gotten clarification on purchasing renewable energy credits to reduce your fines. If you do take some of the good faith efforts, you're not allowed to dip into the renewable energy credits method. And then it provides guidance for affordable housing, houses of worship, and what is their pathway for 97 compliance. I'm going to touch upon the three topics which are obviously receiving the most attention, and this is what we've been getting a lot of questions on from our clients. So as you will see, the good faith efforts, what it is, it's essentially illustrating to the DOB a method where they will mitigate your penalties. I'm showing 6 on the slide. There's actually 7. The 7th one is if your building is impacted by a major disaster, we're talking major fire, flooding, there's a way for you, this is another way of mitigating penalties in the first cycle, which starts in 2024. So in order to tap into the mitigated penalties approach, you need to comply with 3 things. You need to submit your annual emissions report in 2025, your benchmarking report, as well as an attestation for Local Law 88, which is the lighting and submetering law, which came out in 2009. The first mitigated penalty approach is a complete application for the work approved by the DOB. I like to call this you're having your shovels in the ground approach, where you have permits pulled from the DOB. You're submitting that work to them to illustrate that you're already starting the work to bring the building into compliance for the first cycle, which is 2024 through 2029. The second approach, which is the build out of electrification readiness, it's sort of similar, but this is where you're showing the DOB that you have been in conversation with the local utility. For most of us, it's Con Ed, that you're working on bringing additional load to the building for electrification purposes. and you need to show proof that you have reached out to Con Ed responded, and that the process is underway. Previous compliance with emissions limits. So let's say you'll file in 2025, you're under the emissions limits, and then at some point in that first cycle from 24 to 29, you're over those limits. You can protest that with the DOB. The process for that will be still outlined in future rule changes, which are set to come out shortly from what we're being told. Critical facility, this is if you're operating, obviously a best example here would be a hospital. You're operating the facility, it's an essential facility, so you just have to show that that is the case. Fine adjustment, so the fine adjustment component, there's still more guidelines which will come out in the future, but you're basically demonstrating that the carbon fines will become a financial hardship for the building. And there's more disclosure coming from the DOB on how that process is going to work. And then the decarbonization plan is really showing the DOB the path of how you're going to come into compliance with being carbon neutral by 2050. There's a few components that go into it. The first one is conducting an energy audit on your property. You will itemize all of the mechanical components at the building, and then compose a list of projects on how you plan to bring your building into being carbon neutral by 2050. The list of projects is accompanied by a timeline. What is your plan for financing those projects, as well as the calculations of how these projects will impact your carbon emissions. If you do take the decarbonization plan route, so you still have to submit your emissions report by 2025 along with the plan. Then by 2027, you have to hit your carbon emissions benchmarks set for 2024. And by 2028, you have to hit and illustrate that you're ready to hit your carbon emissions benchmark set for 2030. All of these are sort of a mediated resolution with the DOB. So there will be an agreement in place between the property and the DOB on what the fine structure would be if any of those approaches are taken. And you must continue to file your annual emissions report along with the supporting documents, which apply to any of the mitigated any of the good efforts for mitigated penalties. Next slide. So the other thing that is a topic of a lot of discussion is beneficial electrification or early electrification. This is basically where DOB, the city, I like to call this dip your toes in the water of electrifying the building partially. This is where if, let's say, you electrify your domestic hot water or any other component that is associated with cooling or heating the building, the electricity used on that equipment, as long as it's metered separately and recorded, and we can provide that data, will be assigned a negative coefficient. So it won't count against you. And additionally, it will reduce the amount of the carbon fines that you're projected. And those credits can be used up to 2036. So if your building is currently under the caps and you decide to do some sort of partial electrification project, you can use those credits in the future and apply them to the next cycle, which runs through 2035. And then finally, penalties for non-compliance. So the penalties are very strict. You have to submit your annual emissions report every year if your building is on the covered buildings list for Local Law 97. Failure to submit that report carries a monthly fine with it. That fine is calculated based on the square footage of the building times 50 cents. So simple calculation, if you have a 100,000 square foot building, that's a $50,000 a month penalty for non-compliance if you fail to submit the report. And that's regardless of whether you are over or under the carbon emissions limit. And then if you're exceeding your emissions limit, the fine is calculated based on $268 times every metric ton over the building's limit.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Matt. So, why is this important and how does it affect you? Right. So the first thing we're telling our buildings are, let's understand the law and the changes to it and how it may affect you. What have you done? What are you thinking about doing? And the next and maybe the most important step we take after digesting these changes to the law are, what is your current baseline greenhouse gas emissions and local law 97 standing versus the law at the end of 2024 and 2030? And we say that because in some instances, we are finding that square footage is not properly accounted for in our buildings, or the use type might be missing. Maybe you have an urgent care facility or some type of medical facility. And we say that because these different types of usage have different allowable greenhouse gas emissions, even including the number of bedrooms within the apartments within a building. So we always want to start and establish what your baseline is here. And we can review, the raw data, which is oversimplified, your local law, your energy consumption divided by your building characteristics. Look for areas where there might be some inconsistencies or inaccuracies. And then that time we say, we need to evaluate our building individually. And we then look to what programs and rebates are out there by the state. And one of the first calls we make and products we look to is the Flex Tech program. So I'm very pleased that the leader of that Flex Tech program for multifamily, Phil, will be here to explain what that is, what are we even talking about with Flex Tech, and why it's something you should strongly consider.
Thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate it, and good evening. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending this webinar and listening to us, talk about all these programs and offerings. So, next slide, please. To quickly introduce myself, I'm Phil Dubuque. I'm a project manager at NYSERDA with the large buildings multifamily residential team. I've been on this team for about 1.5 years now, and have been working in the energy efficiency and carbon reduction field for my entire career, with 6 years of energy consulting experience, working as an energy auditor and commissioning before my time here at NYSERDA. So next slide, please. So today, I'm going to go over an overview of some key programs. One would be the FlexTech about by Matt Low Carbon Pathways program, which is the next step beyond just the studies, and that is our implementation program. But really, the first place I like to start when talking about NYSERDA's programs on the multifamily residential side is just the general eligibility and what is a multifamily building in NYSERDA's eyes. And just a kind of cool, interesting fact is that 75% of the existing buildings will still be here in 2050 and in operation, specifically in multifamily. And what NYSERDA defines multifamily as is buildings that have 5 or more dwelling units, and at least 50% of the gross heated square footage is residential space. To be eligible for these projects, typically a lot of these programs require that the building pays into the electric system benefits charge or the clean energy fund. However, we do have some instances where when buildings do not pay into this, there is funding in certain programs to serve those buildings still. So please feel free to reach out on a case-to-case basis. Next slide, please. So this is really the primary slide in program that I always say is the first path that every building should take when they're looking at their carbon reduction and energy efficiency journey. The FlexTech program offers a 50 to 75% cost share for technical assistance in the form of energy studies that can be focused on electrification readiness, and overall energy efficiency measures. To do this, really, you can work with any service provider that is of your choice, but we also have a qualified list of FlexTech consultants and multifamily building solutions network that you can work with and reach out to us, and we're happy to send you recommendations off of that list that serve your area. The funding for this process is available through 2025 on a first come, first serve basis. And really what these studies do is they help guide you on the path to meeting your local law compliance or just overall energy and carbon reduction goals. So just like Matt said, this is really a great first step to understanding your building as it currently is, what its carbon emissions are, what you're spending on energy at the building, and then also finding ways to then reduce it through energy efficiency measures in both the electrification readiness areas. So that's really kind of a general overview of what this program offers. There is also a 75% cost share increase or a 25% adder to the program for affordable properties that go through the Affordable Multifamily Energy Efficiency Program, AMEP. Next slide, please. So the next thing that I want to talk about that we're going to have some pretty big changes coming to soon. And that is our low carbon pathways program. This is our implementation program, right? You get your technical assistance in your study and you understand what your building needs to do, and you've planned the path with FlexTech. The next step is getting this done and funding getting this done. And so at NYSERDA, the premier program we have in multifamily is our low carbon pathways program. This current structure is set up as a 4-package system that focuses on envelope, ventilation, heating and cooling electrification, and domestic hot water electrification. These packages are designed to be implemented in a modular form. So basically what that means is you can either implement any one package at a time and come back and stage this as is appropriate for your building's time and budget. But also you can come in doing multiple of these measures at the same time. These can all help you meet your carbon reduction goals in your building and hopefully help you save energy and have a more comfortable living environment for you and the other residents of your buildings. As the program currently stands, you must work with a FlexTech consultant or multifamily building solution network provider. However, this program's current structure will be ending on the 17th of next month, and on the 20th next month, we'll be opening up our new and more, I think, exciting program that we've really taken market feedback from you guys and our participants to really better serve you in the communities. So if you could jump to the next slide, please, I'll talk about the new structure and just give you a brief preview of what's to come for the program here. So with regards to the program, we've really focused on addressing eligibility barriers. We really want to get more participation and be open for more buildings to come into the program. We did this by focusing on removing the requirements for replicability. So that's requiring of portfolio sizes or being a part of a housing association, although everybody here is obviously a part of CNYC, which makes them eligible for the program in that sense. We also focused on construction eligibility for unique typologies of buildings, as well as systems in buildings to help really be able to get everybody to participate. So really, we are dedicated to serving disadvantaged communities as well here at NYSERDA. So we've been focusing on tracking more and allowing for more cost share for these types of properties that are deemed affordable on NYSERDA's standards. So the one thing that I'll just go over at a quick level here is the new incentive structure, as well as the measure packages and how it's been rechanged into the new program. If you could jump to the next slide, please. So this is our new incentive structure table. The key things to note on the left side is that the measure packages have changed slightly. We now have envelope, appliances, heating and cooling, and domestic hot water. What we did is the ventilation, while it's not on here anymore, has just been moved into a more comprehensive path where it can be a bonus through both the envelope and the heating and cooling packages. And the reason for that is we really wanted to pull appliances out to the forefront so that your buildings, when they're looking to fully electrify, can get that final step to full electrification, which is converting your gas cooking and laundry off of the gas into high efficiency electric equivalents. We also opened up into a tiered approach that focuses on 2 separate tiers. And these tiers are basically targeted to be a more achievable path and more lighter path that focuses more on just above code envelope measures, which would be your tier 1, as well as your partial electrification approach that can be a little bit more affordable and help you get from 2024 to 2030 without preventing the full electrification and meeting those 2035 and beyond goals with your carbon reduction. The next thing we did too is we upped the incentive amounts. We've targeted at 30% of the average cost of these measures as our incentive amount. And these can be seen all in the incentive column below. So this has some pretty good increases from what we previously did to better help support you as the residents of our state. If you could jump to the next slide, please. So if you'd like to hear more about the new Low Carbon Pathways program, we are having a webinar on next Wednesday, November 1st. The link is provided in the slides that can be provided to you after the presentation today, where we'll go over in more detail the eligibility changes, the measure package adjustments, and the new incentive adjustments, updated deliverables, and so much more about this new and exciting change to the program. I also wanted to note that our real-time energy management plus tenants program is having a webinar opening up in most likely end of January of this year. And so the R10 program is going to become available starting November of this year to the CNYC members and multifamily at large. And so this session that they're going to have in early January is going to focus on an R10 case study at 110 Sherman from both the service provider and the ownership's perspectives. Next slide, please. One thing I always like to leave with at the end of my presentations is just talking about best practices. And I think this really aligns with exactly what Matt's been telling everybody here. And that is, the first thing is always understand your building. That's the first key and important step. And to do that, use energy audits and energy studies, and you can utilize the funding from the NYSERDA FlexTech program to help you meet these study needs and understand your building. When you are looking at this, pay attention to pairing electrification readiness with space heating and cooling electrification. This can help lower peak loads in the building to help better account for the upgraded loads from converting to electric heating and cooling, as well as improve comfort and just reduce the upfront cost of larger systems needing to be installed. Time energy efficiency improvements with your capital improvements. That's the whole point of the FlexTech study as well. It helps you stage the approach, and these energy studies as well, helps you stage the approach so that you can implement these when your systems are reaching their end of their useful life, so that you're not double dipping in the costs, right? Finally, the last couple of things I like to talk about is assess your building's electrical infrastructure. Electrification can sometimes need you to upgrade your electrical infrastructure within your building, and not considering this during your study stage prevents you from potentially going through these projects. They can be a large upfront cost, and you should be prepared and aware of the cost ahead of time. This is what I'm doing here, and you should all do this with everybody within your community, within your building. Share information and experiences. That's the whole point of today, is to go over and share those experiences so that we can help you meet your carbon reduction goals, and always consider your renewable energy and energy storage solutions at your buildings. Matt, if you just go to the next slide, please. What you'll see here is just a few resources that we have that can help you either get to our program webpage, become a part of our email list to learn about our programs as they get updated, as well as a very interesting case study on a condo co-op building in New York City that participated in our Low Carbon Pathways program and has a new heat pump system in their building, serving their building. Next slide, please. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our general inbox as well as myself. Here's my email listed here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can use to help, and I'll answer any questions along the way and at the end of this session. So I will pass it on back to you.
Thank you. We appreciate that. So as an owner's rep and as a project manager and someone who represents boards and condos, you know, why FlexTech? Well, FlexTech, it will get you, first of all, a pre-qualified engineer to perform a study. So you already can have confidence that if they can submit a FlexTech report, that you can count on them and they're reliable. And the main reason we like FlexTech programs is it's free money to give your building a unique evaluation of your building systems and how you can reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. So I can't recommend, you know, if you are either, you know, self-managed or managed by, you know, a third party management company to reach out if you haven't done so already and ask your property manager to get you proposals from engineering firms who can participate in the FlexTech program. Get that offset rebate, and get a unique report to your building. And what is in that report? Well, Mike Scarano of NPower Group, one of a FlexTech approved vendor and someone we trust a lot at ACAM, is going to walk you through what that report looks like and why we think so highly of it.
All right, well, thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate the introduction there. You can go to the next slide for me. Next one, I guess. Again, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Michael Scarano, like Matt said, Managing Director and founder of NPower Group, and we're an engineering firm that does a lot of FlexTech work and a lot of work in New York City on decarbonization and a lot of studies in general. So we've been a FlexTech partner since 2014, but although I've been probably doing FlexTech reports since the turn of the century, I guess you could say, maybe before, when under various different formats of nice sort of stuff, working on energy efficiency measures and things along those lines. So you can go to the next slide. So we're here as a resource and work a lot with ACAM. And again, thanks for the invite here. I mean, really with a FlexTech report, there's a lot of different things that can go into this. I mean, obviously a lot of the review nowadays is looking at energy efficiency measures that can be done for the building, as well as electrification measures, because clearly, decarbonization is clearly the driving force right now that we're going through, as Matt and Phil had talked about in terms of what we've been looking at. But really, the big things when we do our reports is to look something like this when you get it, right? You want to see a very nice detailed report. You want to see something that looks professional. You're going to get something that's going to have a professional engineer that's going to look at all the different systems. The report should be very specific to the building itself. Building overview based upon the size, number of apartments, whatnot. I mean, we have seen reports in the market sometimes that I wouldn't say necessarily don't reflect exactly what's in there. So eventually, whatever provider you work with, and there's a lot of very good qualified vendors that are certainly on the nice sort of approved FlexTech sheet. If you obviously chose not to use us, that can certainly do a good job at doing this. And certainly, what it really comes down to is doing a very detailed energy review of the building itself and providing a lot of information about the equipment that you guys have and coming up with very good recommendations that could basically help you to reduce carbon, reduce energy, and something that you can look to provide a long-term goal for going forward. Next slide, Matt. So when we do these reports, again, we look at various different systems. If you pulled up one of our reports, it would have a lot of narrative locations, and we don't necessarily need to kind of go through that. But really what you're trying to get to, especially with board members and just managers in general, I mean, try to dissect it down to a very simple location to try to put these measures that we're looking at in order for maybe where you would want to start with sort of the lower cost, no cost measures, and certainly bring those forward. When we do look at these reports too, all these FlexTech reviews should include, a calculation of annual savings. It should have at least somewhat of a credible cost estimate associated with them. We include and providers include, potential rebates and incentives, and certainly Phil went through some of the implementation stuff on the low carbon pathways, which was great. There's Con Ed incentives, there's clean heat incentives. We as a provider try to take all that to account. Sometimes we get into renewables. We may actually talk about some of the investment tax credits that are available as well, and how they could potentially apply to co-ops and shareholders that live in the apartments as well. So those are things that we kind of go through. And, we try to do ourselves a very good calculation on an energy space. How much would this project cost if we just did energy saving measures and consider that? And we also like to consider what the carbon penalty impact would be under Local 97. So, and Matt Selba went through a little bit of how that calculation works when you look at if you're over your carbon target and you have to actually reduce carbon, how much could this specific measure actually reduce? So if you look at these measures that we put on this sheet as an example, I mean, the second one, I'll just take that, upgrade and seal exhaust ventilation system. If it looked at that project and it had a $45,000 roughly savings and it was a $300,000 investment, and we were able to get, $78,000 worth of incentives, that brings it down even before any carbon considerations down to a 5-year simple payback, which is pretty good as far as energy measures go. And then with the carbon savings, would bring that down even further. So certainly buildings that are, over the cap of carbon penalty in terms of local 97 compliance, whether it's currently when we're starting or in the future, these reports are very helpful for, or even buildings that don't have carbon penalties and thresholds. You can see what maybe the value of the carbon would be, or just do the evaluation based upon energy efficiency savings that are there. But certainly these reports should have a sort of a summary and a roadmap that they kind of give you some direction of where to go as you're doing these reports.
Yes,
Next
and,
one.
Mike,
Okay.
if I may, actually,
Yeah.
us at ACAM is someone who represents boards. That slide that Mike was detailing is the most important in the entire report that we get. This allows us to work with the board to create the plan that's best for them. And I can't stress enough that you also want your engineer to review this with you to help in that setting, in those board meetings, to use this as really step one into determining now, like, what project should you pursue. And it's a great tool, and we can't recommend enough. We also like it in table format. We find it's easy to digest, it's easy to save, and it's easy to come back to. And this is literally just like one of like 100 pages in this FlexTech study. There's typically some backup for each item, why they saw it, maybe pictures, but this table, I can't stress enough what a great tool it is, and one you should absolutely request.
Yeah, and again, like Matt said, the reports can get to be 100 pages pretty easily. And really, if you're working with somebody, we like to dissect it down to like a simple format, right? So certainly an economic table like this is something good. A lot of times too, we'll sort of group things into various different locations, like, hey, 1 through 3 should be done this year. Maybe 4, 5, and 6 could be done in 3 years, and we try to also tie it sometimes into capital planning as well. So, as an owner's rep, then Matt can obviously take these measures and on a capital plan basis, try to lay out for the owners of the building, okay, these are measures that you can do now. Here's your long-term plan, and here's how your carbon's going to go, and here also how it ties into local 97 as well. So if you actually go to the next slide, you can kind of see overall things that we actually project out. So really, again, when we do these FlexTech reports, besides having all the recommendations in there and how we got to the answers, really the report analyzing the overall impact of the measures in regard to energy saving and carbon emission. So we always, include the one table that, Matt was talking about before, but we also talk about, how, this thing's going to apply to both carbon emission penalties, and we do throw in letter grades because, even though letter grades don't have any financial merit necessarily to the building, everybody likes to see if they're an A or B, everybody wants to be an A-rated building, right? If you could be, so we always like to kind of do that. I mean, again, I think that was, while it does cause us a lot of stuff to do, I think that was sort of a brilliant move on the city's part originally to kind of show a sort of a grading mechanism to basically give at least some people some sort of guidance to sort of improve their efficiency grade of their building. But certainly the carbon mobilization, the actual penalties, are really what has financial teeth. So we spend a lot of time obviously on those. And really in this particular example as here, it's just showing that if you see, hey, if you look at this building currently, it would have had a no carbon penalty in the 2024 through 2029 period. It would have seen a $115,000 annual penalty starting in 2030. It also has a corresponding letter grade, which obviously everybody sees those on their buildings when they walk in. We also, in terms of our FlexTech reports, sometimes have to make, look at the benchmarking data and make changes to that, or suggest changes that the benchmarking provider may be able to actually do, because it's like Matt was talking about before, square foot calculations come up all the time. We definitely see buildings, because of the way the DOF, Department of Finance, would originally had done a lot of these calculations, they're sort of underrepresented on square footage. So we can make an adjustment on the square footage to show what the true wall-to-wall area from basically floor, basement all the way to roof is. That can actually have a very simple, easy change to the square footage, which will decrease the carbon penalties overall. And then the last thing we do is we take the ECM table that you saw before in the last page, and we actually project forward on what carbon penalties would be all the way from the current first period, the second period, and sometimes in some other slides we'll try to project out what we think could potentially be the penalties for future years. Obviously not as easy to do because some of the emission calculations are not available, but we make our own sort of representation of that, or where you could possibly be if the grid gets cleaner and the cap starts lowering down more of what the building could be. But certainly in this example, it's, you know, if you followed our, 7 or 8 step process, obviously capital improvements to do that, it just gives an idea of where the building can go. And so any good flex tech report should really, list a bunch of various measures, should include measures that may not be as economically feasible, but again, and then the building has the opportunity to pick and choose which way they go with. You can go to the next slide, Matt. Yeah, and again, just trying to follow up with the notion that, again, these reports are supposed to be tools for buildings to make capital planning decisions and look to be able to use the report as a way for the buildings to look to decarbonize. It should certainly be done with the air of professionalism and an executive summary that sort of hopefully, drives a conversation or drives sort of a bunch of things for the buildings to kind of basically pick and choose. And again, we spend a lot of time certainly in the executive summary and how we would actually communicate this data and path or plan to various clients that we work with. And again, just I think our reports reflect very well with what NYSERDA likes, and certainly just the message that obviously if it's subpar, which again nobody that ACAM would recommend, or even most of the NYSERDA providers do a good job, but certainly to kind of go through and try to use that tool in order to, in the Flex Tech report, in order to kind of drive through and make these decisions going forward. Next slide, Matt. Yeah, and certainly if these slides, I guess, we made available, I'm certainly here as a resource to talk to. So again, I really appreciate the time, Matt, and to kind of go through this. So certainly I'll stay on for any questions afterwards, but thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. And while most of the Flex Tech study and table is towards electrification, not everything is. Sometimes it's as simple as LED lighting, installing sensors, ceiling exhaust and ventilation. And so, from this point, we have a good idea of what projects a building can do. But sometimes, based on the rebates available, particularly via the NAT grid program, we might say this is a good time to do this project over another, particularly every now and then there's like a hotspot, a specific targeted area location where there'll be even higher rebates, and we'll learn about more of that now with Carolyn.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. And just want to stress again, we've talked a lot about Flex Tech and can't tell you how important that is. That really is kind of the roadmap to what you and your building are going to do. So important. And you're right to match up those rebates to what your building is being told to do and the kind of changes that you want to make. So yeah, excellent points. My name is Carolyn Schbelly. I am the lead program manager for National Grid. I manage all the multifamily programs for downstate, both New York City and Long Island. Our territory, different from Con Ed, we have Brooklyn, most of Queens, Staten Island, and then the Rockaways and Long Island are our other territory. Next slide. Okay, so just to cover again, I know everybody, you're hearing net zero, right? And then here comes National Grid, who is the natural gas utility. So we're here to help once again to get to that zero emissions by 2050. We're all on the same page. We can help you get to that goal also. Next slide. Just a few things that we're doing, of course, again, is energy efficiency. So if you can even use less natural gas, of course, that makes then beneficial electrification easier also, as you slowly learn to use less, whether you're using electric, natural gas, whatever. You don't want to use the most of those resources that we have, even water. We want to try and get as efficient as possible. Here at National Grid, we also are do some projects on geothermal. We're working on renewable natural gas, offshore wind, other projects like that also that National Grid is funding here downstate New York. Next slide. Okay, so once again, a little clearer, renewable natural gas. Most of that is from, food waste, animals. I was watching CNBC and Waste Management was on there, and they are thinking of being one of the huge suppliers of renewable natural gas. So just really interesting to see where they were coming in. Green hydrogen also, which is hydrogen that comes from solar, wind, it's renewable. So looking at that kind of hydrogen that we can put through the pipeline, and geothermal energy also. So three of those are our main focus as far as renewables go for a national grid. Okay, we have a high grid project. I know most of you are all in New York City, but out on Long Island, we do have a big high grid project out in the town of Hempstead, where we're going to be blending in green hydrogen into the pipeline with the natural gas to see how we can balance that and how much hydrogen that we can add and decrease the fossil fuel use in that pilot. Next slide. Okay, so here we go. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of the multifamily energy efficiency programs that we have downstate. So right now we have a custom program. So our custom program, and this is for firm rate customers who pay into the SBC. And also if you're a non-firm customer, so you're temperature controlled, interruptible, we also offer these same incentives for those customers too. If you are a true multifamily building, so that's 5 units and above, and you have a multifamily rate code, you can complete any kind of custom project. We pay $2 a therm right now. So what we'll do is we'll look at your usage, we'll look at your flex. A lot of times you'll have your flex tech study. It will tell you, hey, you should do this, this, or this. If any of those measures save your usage of natural gas and you decide to do that measure, we will actually look at your scope of work, look at what the difference in the therms will be, calculate those savings, and then also tell you in an offer letter exactly what the incentive would be, the money that we'll give you towards that project if you decide to do that change. New York City, it's up to $200,000, 70% of the project costs. Out in Long Island, $100,000 up to 70%. Energy management systems is a big one, steam traps, things like that. So anything that decreases natural gas, just come to us, give us a shout out, and we'll figure out an incentive for you. Next slide. Okay, then our next big program is our total building comfort program. So we've been talking about beneficial electrification. The number one thing, though, that you should be doing before you electrify your building is insulating it. So those air source heat pumps cannot work properly unless your building envelope is insulated. Now, with our total building comfort, it's a little different than our other multifamily programs. For total building comfort, for the condos and co-ops, even though each resident may be paying their natural gas bill independently, that building envelope is done on a whole building level. Okay, you're not just having one tenant replace 2 windows in the building. You're going to replace the windows in the whole building. You're going to do a roof project for the whole building. So what we do is that the president of the HOA or LLC, whoever is in charge of those kinds of changes, you would come to National Grid, and what we do is we combine the usage of everyone in that building that is paying those separate bills, determine what the usage is, and then decide how many therms you'll save or how much natural gas usage you'll save by doing those weatherization projects, which is like air sealing, wall insulation, weather stripping the doors and windows, new windows and doors, roof insulation. So anything that is building envelope. Next slide, please. Okay, so here our buildings, natural grid, so total building comfort again, our sales team, the phone number is there. I'm sure you'll get the slide deck after. Any buildings over 25,000 square feet, give us a call if you're thinking of doing any of these building envelope measures. Now the $19 a therm is for our firm rate customers only, unfortunately, with this. Our non-firm customers, since those customers during cold weather are on interruptible rates and may not be burning natural gas during those really cold days, they only get $2 a therm. Okay, but still something towards that. Next slide. Then we have our buildings who are under 25,000 square feet. So just to give you an idea, that's about 20 units or less. You can actually contact, we have our implementation vendor Leidos right now, and we understand that those smaller buildings, you're not used to necessarily putting in for incentives like that. You don't know maybe what the whole process is. So we had hired Leidos to help us kind of give you that white glove service, helping you walk through that system, getting the application ready. Do you have a contractor? What documents do we need to process this? So once again, $19 a therm for our firm rate customers, $2 for our non-firm customers. Next slide. I'm sorry, everybody. My allergies are horrible this week. So air sealing and insulation, just to understand that, that's like that can reduce your heating and cooling costs up to 20%. So air sealing, especially if you know, it's like when you put new windows in, a lot of times my daughter lives in her apartment in Queens, and she was putting towels around her window because there was air coming in from around the windows, which just, of course, made me cringe. But anytime that you can feel that draft coming from the outside to the inside, that's what you're trying to insulate again. Whether it's cold air coming in during the winter or that hot air coming in during the summer. So that air sealing wall insulation gives you that barrier, once again, between the outside and the inside. So that's one thing that you can do. Next slide. Weather stripping doors and windows. Once again, around the doors, you can even do, and these are, of course, not the interior doors. That's really important. We're talking about exterior doors. It could be patio doors or actual doors from the outside of the building into the lobby. That's where anytime that you have a conditioned space, which was your heating and cooling, you want to keep those outside vents clear. Caulking around the windows again, weather stripping. Also caulking around the top floor where your roof is to make sure there's no leaks coming in. By your outlets even, if you have an exterior wall, doing anything like that. Next slide. Okay, window and door replacement, like I said. Windows and patio doors. To be honest with you, I mean, the most efficient building would have no windows or doors, but we don't live like that. That would not be fun. So you do want to place windows and doors, but the biggest part of that window and door replacement, again, is that weather stripping, the caulking, making sure that you take care of any of those spaces between those new windows and doors. So just to really look for that. I love how when Michael was talking about the flex tech, that you want to make sure that people are asking the right questions. You want to make sure when you have contractors doing this work in your building that they're doing the right kind of work, that they're including all of those little things that make that project really worthwhile and energy efficient. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm sorry, so I'm done. But yeah, please, energy efficiency, like I said, weatherization, key. If you're going to do beneficial electrification, you can't do that unless your building is tight, weatherized. So please, if anything that you're doing in your building that's going to save natural gas, talk to National Grid, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And, we've been implementing a lot of these projects in ACAM managed buildings. For the most part, a lot of our buildings are doing window replacements. Maybe it's aesthetic, maybe, it's time for new windows, they're failing. And we learned early that some aren't actively pursuing, especially in buildings on natural gas, these rebate opportunities. They're great. So you can either reach out to Carolyn directly. There are also some approved program vendors who can actually help you create the rebate based on the specific project scope of work that you're doing. It would actually get submitted to National Grid, who then review it, say, yes, the project that your contractor proposed will save blank amount of therms. For that, we will provide you with blank rebate. It's all on paper. It's great. And it's just a great check and balance and a way to get money towards doing these necessary projects. So, the next thing we look at is what other resources are out there, if you didn't know where to start, and what opportunities are there to help pay for these projects beyond capturing all the rebates, both in the beginning for the study and then now as you're doing the work itself.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Chintz. I'm the financing specialist at the New York City Accelerator. I'm going to talk about financing, as Matt mentioned. You've heard about some of the incentives and cost sharing. And once you've taken care of that and you've reduced the cost of the work you're going to do, then we need to still, or you might want to finance the net cost after you've gotten all those incentives. So if some of you may have attended the earlier class, and we did have my colleague went through with the assistance that the New York City Accelerator provides, but I'm going to just go over it briefly for any of those of you who are not familiar with it, with a focus, and I'll focus on the financing after this. So the New York City Accelerator is a free service for building owners. It's sponsored by the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. We're kind of like the boots on the ground to help building owners implement Local Law 97, compliance. And so we're a large group, a team of people that are divided up into building tracks. We provide services, technical services, to help you assess and implement the building decarbonization work that you want to do. And so we have a service provider network. Probably many of the people on this call on the panel here are part of our service provider network, and we can help lead you to the right service providers and the right incentives. And then we have, you can go to the next slide. We have specialists that also help with things like solar, if you wanted to put solar on your roof, or myself, which is the financing specialist. So as you're having your conversation with the various, with your account manager and all the different resources that they can point you into, if you want to finance the work, then I can get involved. And who is eligible for Accelerator? Any buildings, private buildings that are 5,000 square feet or above. And again, you just connect with us and it's all free. You can go to the next slide. So in terms of financing, once I would get involved, depending on the type of building that you have, the kind of work that you want to do, what your existing financial structure is. That would help me to determine what are the best options out there for you for financing. And then I can help connect you to them and just generally be there as kind of a third objective party to help you assess your options and just navigate through the process. You can go to the next slide. So why do we even want to use financing? So some of this may be a little bit obvious, but I thought it'd be useful to go through because it is a little different for energy projects often. So obviously it helps you, it eliminates or minimizes the need for any upfront funding. By using financing, you can address not just immediate, but longer term local law 97 requirements, because by financing it, you can spread the cost out. Often there are projects that just don't move, they're stalled, and they can get facilitated by the use of financing. Also, you might have building reserves. It's probably smarter not to use reserves. Those are really there more for capital improvements, emergency needs. So using financing helps you avoid depleting your reserves. You can also, if you are doing other capital work, you can combine your energy work, energy retrofit work with it, and thereby making that financing more efficient and more cost effective. But the main thing that I really wanted to show this slide for is that you often, when this is usually you're doing a capital improvement to the building, you don't usually get anything back, but energy efficiency and some of these other measures is unique in that you can get savings, and that's, you know, not only energy savings and maintenance savings. I've seen situations where even insurance premiums have gone down. So the operating expenses of the building can be reduced. And when we have financing that is long-term, which we do have now, those payments get stretched out on a longer-term amortization schedule. And there's a possibility that those savings are more than sufficient to cover the debt service every year. And you can even create some net cash flow from this work. You can go to the next slide. So the way we kind of approach the different types of financing is sort of looking at the building's life cycle. And by that just simply means, you know, when a building is built or it's refinanced, usually, you know, you have a mortgage, and you know, even when you're refinancing, you usually will include some capital projects in that refinancing. And so if you're coming to the end of that cycle, you're within a year or two of your mortgage coming due, that's a good place to look. That's the first place to look. Today, you might think about it a little differently because rates have changed so much, but mortgage, including the energy work in a mortgage, is, you know, a very easy place to get it financed. They don't have any requirements on what you do with the money. So that is kind of the first place to look. And even if you're not at the end of the cycle, sometimes your lender will give you a supplemental mortgage, which is just, you know, co-ops often don't have very much debt, and so they can easily get more debt in a supplemental mortgage, and it just sits alongside the other mortgage, and it could be used for the work that you want to do for your building decarbonization. But most buildings are not at that stage, so we have what we call mid-cycle financing products for those buildings. You can go to the next slide. So just kind of going through the different products, as I mentioned, the mortgage loans at the end of the cycle. The other thing that some mortgage lenders will provide is a green mortgage, and that's really the same thing as a mortgage, but the lenders are starting to look at the fact that there are savings in some of this work that you're doing, and they're starting to underwrite those savings. And so if you get a lender like that, you can get more proceeds in the mortgage, and some of them will even lower the rate. So that's kind of it for the end of the building cycle. But for the mid-cycle financing products, we have the New York City Accelerator PACE financing, which you've probably heard about. I'll explain a little bit more about it in a minute. That's a mid-cycle product. The specialty finance companies, which are local green banks, mission-driven lenders, they're often nonprofits or CDFIs, which again have sort of a mission, and that mission is to help move the lending market towards lending more for energy efficiency. So they're like kind of at the front line, but they're have products out there that are very effective for you today. You can go to the next slide. The other two options that you have for financing, and we have a group of these. We've done an RFQ, and we have 13 different lenders that fit into these different categories. So this would be part of the discussion that we have when you work with the accelerator on financing. So equipment loans or leases is another way that's done. Those are offered by different lenders, sometimes from the manufacturers. They are shorter in term than what the specialty lenders or PACE can provide. And usually the rates are pretty high, but they're good if you're just doing a one type of project, you know, as opposed to the whole building solution. If you're just replacing equipment, and they can get done pretty quickly. Non-debt financing solutions, those are what is referred to as a service, or it's kind of in the past there were energy service agreements that were usually done for the very large kind of institutional buildings, but they are now available for smaller buildings and multifamily buildings. And what they are is that a service provider will come in and do the assessment. They'll do the audit, the energy audit. They'll help you implement, or they'll help you plan a project, and they'll implement it. They'll actually do the construction, and they will fund it. So you don't have to take out your own financing. And then the way that gets paid back is basically a service contract, which is like a lease, and that'll be over like 10 or 15 years. And they usually like to help you pay for that. And these work most often when there's a lot of savings, and the savings can help pay back that service contract. So no upfront costs with these products, and you know they aren't financing for the building, so it's off balance sheet if that's of interest for any building owners. You can go to the next slide. So I'm going to just talk now about a few of these kind of more popular products that we've been using. So we have, as I said, New York City Accelerator PACE financing, which was authorized under Local Law 96 when Local Law 97 was passed under the Climate Mobilization Act. And the idea was that they were passed as a couple because this was the way to help pay for Local Law 97 improvements. PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. It started in California about 15 years ago, and it's been spreading around the country, and we now have it in New York City. And the real benefit of it is that it provides long-term financing. So going back to what I was saying about having more affordable payments, long-term financing is the key to that. And this really kind of borrows on an old municipal finance tool. I come from the public finance and real estate market and financing, but we've been using this kind of assessment financing where usually it's in a district like a sewer district, and all of the owners get the benefit of a public improvement, and they all pay for it as a tax charge, as a special assessment on their tax bill. So that's the reason we're able to use this mechanism as a public. The public purpose of PACE is that we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but in this case, it's work to your private building, and it's voluntary. It's not part of a district, but it's modeled after that very old and successful financing. And it does allow for very long-term financing because it is, by definition, the term is based on the useful life of the improvement. So if you're doing solar panels or heat pumps or windows. Those have very long lives to them, useful lives. And so it's kind of the weighted average of all of those components determines the term of the financing. And often with PACE, it would be 20 or more years, even up to 30 years. So you can go to the next slide. Just the benefits of PACE, it's 100%, it's fixed rate. As I said, long-term financing is the key, and I explained that in the last slide. It can, by having this long-term payment with a smaller payment, the amortization is far more powerful than the rate. Everybody focuses on interest rate, but you're better off with a higher rate and longer term financing in terms of making it affordable for a co-op or a condo and the residents. So as I said, with this long-term financing, you're more apt to get positive, potentially get positive cash flow because of the long-term financing. So of course, this can improve your building and help you compliance with local law 97. The other key feature about PACE is that because it's paid on the tax bill, it's not a loan. It wouldn't go on your balance sheet as a loan. It's a tax. It's part of your operating expenses. So if you were to sell the building, nothing gets paid off. There's no loan to pay off. It just transfers to the new owner. So the new owner would pay the tax charge and they would get the benefits of it. And the other thing we have in New York City is that you can retroactively finance any improvements as far back as 3 years. So if you put solar panels on the building last year, you could finance that in this current financing with PACE. And so that can be useful of getting additional cash. You can go to the next slide. So just a couple other options here. You know, PACE is a great tool, but it doesn't work all the time. Because it's paid on the tax bill, you need to get your mortgage lender's consent, and sometimes that can be problematic. Also, condominiums can't access PACE because we have C-PACE or commercial PACE in New York City. It's not for individual homeowners, which is essentially what a condominium is. Co-ops can access PACE, but we do have a way of possibly doing PACE for a condominium if a sponsor owns a lot of the units, and we've gone down the path with that with the city, and we think that can get approved. So with those restrictions, the other restriction with PACE is that the lenders, it's a public-private partnership. It's administered by the city, but it's all private lenders, and they have their different rates and terms, and they often will not do a loan that is smaller than 500,000. And we are finding that there's lots of buildings that have loan sizes in the smaller range. So Catalyst Loan is a good option to PACE, and it was created really because of the barriers with PACE. It's offered by Inclusive Prosperity Capital, one of the specialized lenders that I mentioned, a nonprofit. It's an offshoot of the Connecticut Green Bank. And it's long-term financing, just like PACE. They can do loans up to 20 years. And in this case, they serve primarily multifamily. So you can use it for condominiums as well as co-ops, also for affordable housing, which can be problematic for PACE because of the lender consent. There is no charge on the tax bill. It's not secured by a tax lien. So you don't have that mortgage lender consent that you do sometimes with PACE. And they will finance smaller projects well under 500,000, as small as 50,000. The other thing that Catalyst will do is up to 25% of loan can be for health and safety improvements, not just the energy improvements. So some people are using it for their local law 11 needs as well. You can go to the next slide. The other thing I want to tell you about is another one of our specialty lenders, kind of our local green bank in New York, called the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation, or NYC. They have come out recently with the Multifamily Express Green Loan, and this is just targeted to this audience. It's for condominiums and co-ops only. It's for the sizes of 200,000 to 750. And again, that's kind of like the sweet spot of what we're seeing a lot of. It's a 10-year loan. with an additional period for construction. The rate is 7%, but if you're working with the accelerator, they'll drop it to 6.5%, which in today's market is actually quite competitive. They finance 90 or more % of the cost. They do like to see you put in a little bit of your own money, kind of a skin in the game thing, whereas with PACE, it's 100%, as I mentioned. There are no prepayment penalties, or they're very low, and that's useful because, and that's the same case with the Catalyst. If you just want to use this loan as a bridge loan or as an interim until you refinance your mortgage, you can easily pay it off. The other key with the MEG loan is that it can close within 6 weeks. So they're making it very streamlined. The documentation is streamlined. Minimal upfront costs. I think the legal costs are like $2,800, which is very low. So it's a very easy process and a quick process. You can go to the next slide. This is just the diagram of we have a financing, the accelerator financing toolkit, and it has information about all these products, and its roadmap that will help you kind of as a first look where you think where you could maybe go to finance your building. But always, I would say, come to us and we can talk more specifically about your building and help you get it financed. I think the next slide is just some contact information. And I'll stop there. I know we probably have questions coming in.
Yes, thank you. And, I can speak from experience. We've used the CNYC loan a number of times. It's an interesting product. And, again, you need to understand, again, like where you are both in terms of the law and what you need to do in terms of projects and engineering. And then also once you have that, well, where are you financially? Do you have a robust reserve fund? Do you have an ongoing assessment? Do you have a mortgage coming due, or did you already take out additional mortgage proceeds to prepare for this? So we like to, we start at the beginning. We want a baseline of what your true score is. We then tap into what rebates are available for engineering studies. We then take that study, review it with the board, understand with Nat Grid if the building is on gas, what rebates are available, and then how do we pay the rest of it. So with that, we want to thank everyone, all the panelists, for joining us today. I see a couple questions that I know I'm capable of answering, and then we'll pass around those that require a bit more expertise. So one of the first questions that we hear all the time is, can you get a FlexTech audit and an audit from an energy service agreement for a specific project? And that answer is yes. So we do this all the time. A building might tell us, hey, we want to tap into FlexTech, but we really want you to look into solar feasibility. We would then, send out a request for a proposal, an RFP, to qualified engineering firms and write exactly that. So you would get both your overall FlexTech study. It might have a focus in particular on a type of project, or maybe it goes a little further like towards design, so you can get it bid out. And it's a great way to utilize the engineers that are already coming out on site to your building a bit more efficiently. So great question, and something we strongly recommend. Another question we have is about, what are the differences between FlexTech and New York Accelerator? And it's a great question because there's a lot of programs out there. You heard about a number of them today. And so one of the main things is, New York Accelerator is a great resource and a great place to start. They can provide you with contractors, engineers who can help you get a FlexTech study, but FlexTech is an oversimplified version, and Phil can elaborate further, but it's a way to get an engineering study of your building performed that has a focus on electrification at a reduced price due to the New York State rebates.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And do you mind if I step in here
Yeah,
just quickly?
please.
Because I think there was another great question kind of based off of that as well. And so, yeah, FlexTech is a program that provides a cost share for engineering studies on your building. And one of the questions was, what types of studies are there that a FlexTech study can be? They'd heard from a provider that there was 2 types that they were offering. And really the best way that I can kind of put this is FlexTech is a pretty flexible program, kind of in the name and built in there. And really what it's designed to do is to really help the building meet what their needs are. So some providers provide generic approaches for comprehensive audits, which is looking at the building as a whole and looking at all of its systems and making recommendations on those systems. But if your building itself is looking for something a little more targeted, like that you want to electrify and you really just want to focus on the implementation of the specific system and what type of electrification systems are best for your heating source, you can do a study specifically targeting that. And so that's really where the nice customization of the program comes in. There's comprehensive options. There's targeted options, and you can really work with different providers as they offer different offerings and paths that they determine are best for the building. But make sure you find a provider that works best for you and offers what you want in your building, because that's our main focus here. We have scoping calls with regards to any projects that are applied to make sure that what's being asked for by you as the customers is provided.
Thank you. We see a question. We get this a lot, actually. This is a great question. Our co-op is supposedly in the clear until 2030. We're not sure which of these options work for us. What should we do? And we say first, you need to understand what your true baseline is and how you actually fare in local law 97 and not just what the city is showing. So what we would recommend you do is you have someone verify your building characteristics. We make sure that your bedroom count is right, your number of apartments is right, the use type of any commercial space or garage is right. And then as Mike Sgrano of NPower mentioned earlier, the Department of Finance is underrepresenting square footage, particularly in subgrade spaces. So when you have a qualified engineer who can factor that back in, you get your true baseline. Where do you actually stand? We take the raw data, we refine it, and from that point forward, you can make your plan. And we strongly recommend doing that really for everyone, even if on paper it looks like you're good, that you could be overrepresented in one area, and we really want to make sure our buildings are, just know what they have to do. And then
I would just add to that sometimes what we will tell people, building owners that we're talking to at the accelerator, that it sometimes will make sense to just do incrementally the work out to 2050, but because we do have now these long-term financing options, it does make sense, do the FlexTech, get your energy audit to look at the whole picture. And it might make sense to actually do more than just the first steps up to 2030, because you can spread out the cost and make it affordable and just get it done. And then, it might be even more cost effective because you're not going to have to do financing again at a later time.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. And we see this is probably a good question for some of the panel members, maybe Mike in particular. We have a lot of buildings that are pre-war, and they're limited in what they can do, right? They'll upgrade a heating system, maybe put in thermostatic control valves, install common area lighting with LED, motion detectors. What else can they do? What should these buildings be focused on? What would you recommend?
And that's a good question. Certainly, again, without going through a whole electrification process, we would obviously look to do some of the measures that you talked about. I mean, and certainly see what we could do to tighten up some of the envelope work. I mean, clearly, we also do like domestic hot water heating systems as well on electrification. That is something that could be more practical to implement than potentially a full electrification on the heating side as well. So those are things that we can look at. But for a pre-war building like you described, it is kind of trying to make, and again, without making the big financial commitment, maybe to go to a full electrification path, because maybe you don't have a carbon penalty right now, and you have plenty of time to sort of let the technology get a little better and maybe a little easier to implement in your building. Yeah, certainly, managing the steam system, making sure it's tight, making sure it's going to operate properly. And again, if we want to look at some carbon stuff, typically we can look at the domestic hot water heating, electrification of that, because again, if you look at a multifamily building and you look at their annual consumption of fuel for the year, we see anywhere from 25 to 40%, sometimes as much as that, but typically around a third of the fuel just is used for making hot water. So that's just an easy way to take a third or so of the building's annual fuel consumption and electrify that without having to make any real major infrastructure requirements for the rest of the building. And then certainly could also tie into some of the thing that Matt Selb was talking about before about having the, especially if you're below the cap, and how you can roll over those savings going forward. So there's definitely things that can be done. And I just think it's getting somebody involved to kind of look at your specific building properly to make sure that measures are put down with the cost savings and payback analysis and carbon play, and then tie into some of the financing if there's some capital measures that need to get done and financed to go forward.
Yeah, Mike, I would also add, you have to remember that the energy usage reported, it's the aggregate usage for the building. So, that includes usage within apartments, even if those apartments are separately metered. So educate your residents on how they can become more efficient within their own apartments as well. If you're doing renovations, put in energy efficient appliances, low flow fixtures, that kind of stuff. Those are all things that will add up.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. And certainly also too is if you have window ACs, we see that in old apartment buildings like that. And as they get upgraded, clearly they're newer and better over time as well. And all that stuff does have a thing. So good point. I forgot to add on the education, and Matt is 100% on target that yes, because it's an aggregate for the whole building. Every one resident can make an improvement in their apartment and actually help the overall carbon score of the building, which reduces penalties and obviously helps decarbonize the city going forward.
And Matt, I just saw another question pop up in here, and Michael, that I think is really interesting. And it's from Neva, who says, an engineer told me my building that our next cycle is in 2028. So don't worry, now the board has time to act. My recommendation here, and this is always, is 2030 and 2028, they seem far away, but these processes take time to really understand and make a plan for your building, and then financially plan to actually be able to implement those measures. So I would always say, always err on the side of caution and act sooner to make a plan and develop and basically save those funds to know what the costs are going to be. Because if you wait till 2028 and start this process then, you really only have about a year to get these implementations done, because how the local law 97 works is it's based off the previous year's bills. So you really want to act sooner rather than later in those approaches. So I always recommend, get your study, get your plan together, see what you need to reach those 2030, 2028 goals, and then just start putting that money aside, putting that plan together, reach out to the New York City Accelerator, reach out to NYSERDA to see what incentives you can get in place and apply to the programs, and get, these contracts started. You still have to get and reach out to a contractor, get financing. So this can take some serious time. And so I highly recommend acting sooner rather than waiting until the end and then having to do a rush.
Yes, thank you. And also we tend to see more rebates at the beginning of these programs, right? Like the LED lighting fund, because LED has been so prevalent for years, is diminishing. Other programs are now being funded, take advantage of the rebates. They're not always there. And also, one of the best part about energy efficiency projects is they all reduce consumption. And when you reduce consumption, you save on the utility cost itself. So why would you not want to save now, and push it, a couple years? So yeah, we strongly recommend starting early, take advantage of what's out there.
I want to jump in and just clarify Jen's question here, because I just want to make sure that it's understood. She says that PACE with a mortgage, building with a mortgage can't access PACE, and that is not true. As I had mentioned, you do need to get your mortgage lender's consent, but many PACE loans get done and many lenders do give consent. So just by virtue of the fact that you have a mortgage doesn't mean you can't access PACE. And if that is the case, that the lender won't consent, we have these other long-term financing products that we turn to.
Thank you. This is a great question too about financial advantage in co-op communities with several, I think they meant buildings planning together as a unit. These larger complexes are typically have great opportunities. You know, if you happen to be in Brooklyn or Queens, there tends to be the space for solar, or if you have multiple buildings, you have multiple roofs for solar. There just tends to be a lot of opportunities in these larger buildings. Matt Sabula and I are about to embark on a 7,000 window replacement project in Brooklyn in a building with natural gas that we are getting significant rebates for. You know, yeah, the larger the project, typically the larger the rebates. So definitely, you're definitely in the right place and thinking about the right things. And then this is actually a great question too. You know, we have some buildings that are still on oil. You know, what incentives do they have either to electrify domestic hot water or to switch to natural gas? Phil, that might be best for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I can definitely answer on the electrification side. So our current programs focus primarily on electrification. I highly recommend reaching out to your local utility if you're looking at converting to natural gas or natural gas improvements. However, you know, if you're on fuel oil too, if you're on natural gas, if you're on electric resistance, you are eligible to participate in our low carbon pathways program. And definitely we highly encourage domestic hot water electrification as an option. It's a very market ready solution right now. And so we have incentives of in the new November 20th coming of up to $1,500 per dwelling unit to convert to heat pumps in the electrification for buildings. And there's also the New York State Clean Heat incentives as well that are run by National Grid and Con Ed and the joint utilities that you can look into as well for those incentives.
And it looks like we have one, thank you. It looks like we have one last question, and it's for Andrew. This person says that their lender actually said no to PACE. Is there any recourse? What should they do?
Well, there is a couple of things. I think the first thing that we normally do when we come across a lender like that is we just go access the other products. That's the benefit of, and as I said, there are other long-term financing products that don't have that restriction. But I will mention something that's developing right now, which is one of the early PACE lenders is developing a product where if a mortgage lender doesn't consent, he has a kind of a product that it sort of includes the mortgage lender in the PACE loan. So they become sort of, they're no longer somebody senior to them because they either do the PACE loan or they buy the PACE loan. So it's something very new, but I'm starting to introduce that into when we come across this situation. So if you're interested in pursuing that with your lender, I'd love to have you come talk to me and we can start accessing that. The other thing that's in development is an insurance product that has been established to pay back a mortgage lender if there's ever a default on a PACE loan. And that's being established in other states. The New York State Insurance Regulatory Commission is very rigorous, and so it's a little harder to get it passed through New York, but we're in the process of providing support to them to help bring that to New York City. So I would encourage you to just reach out to us and we can kind of explore those options.
Thank you. A few more questions came in. One is about a gas boiler that's over 35 years old. Is there any point in considering upgrading or replacing that unit? And funny enough, my team is actually doing just that. I think it's a bit almost 30, it might actually be exactly 35 years old also. And we were debating that too. And when we looked at the new boiler, one, it's more efficient. Two, we were able to integrate a building management system, a BMS system that actually makes it run even more efficiently. As part of that project, we put thermometers inside about 25% of all apartments. So the heat called off of what the internal temperature of the majority of our apartments were running at, and not just because it was cold outside. So definitely something to consider. We also have a question about, domestic hot water. Someone actually went through this process. It looks like they had an audit, and it said domestic hot water will reduce about 12% of total boiler and hot water reduction. Does this seem reasonable? And so we would say to that, one, who was your engineer? Was it part of a FlexTech approved study? You could have this peer reviewed, but sometimes it's just as simple as, maybe the engineer was a bit conservative with the metrics because they didn't want to oversell it. And if there are rebate opportunities for this, one of the best things is that you have an independent third party review the project you're doing, and they tell you your reduction in, in this case, it might be therms or oil usage for not running a boiler during summer to produce hot water. That typically is very inefficient, but you also might have a new boiler. And so again, we strongly recommend that if anyone is considering a project, have an engineer come in, utilize the FlexTech program, use rebates that are available, and yeah, you just have to go through the whole process to build the right projects for you and for your building. So with that, we also get questions about, ceiling. There's obviously going to be some heat loss, and that's true, but there are things you can do. And, again, some of the little things count. The Nat Grid program is about air sealing, insulation, weather stripping, doors, windows. The little things add up, and you need to do them consistently. As particularly caulking, right? If you're doing a local law 11 project and you already have the rigs on the building, every 10 years or so, yeah, maybe replace the caulk just to keep everything a bit more efficient. So with that, it appears we've answered all of everyone's questions. We'll put, if you could please put everyone's contact information up. Yeah, we obviously a lot of great panelists, a lot of great information. So if anyone has any questions, here's the best way to reach everyone.
And you'll get the slides, so you're going to have everybody's contact information. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Matt, for pulling everybody together for this session. Thank you all so much to all of the speakers tonight, and for staying on and for answering the questions and for providing your contact details. Thank you to all of the attendees who have stuck with us for 4 hour-and-a-half long sessions. It shows that co-ops and condos are really working very hard to comply, despite what you might hear. And we appreciate that tremendously. Tom, if you could just go to the next 2 slides, one more, I think. Okay, so just to let you know, we do have 2 more classes now that we're in the process of planning, one on February 15th, which will have 3 separate case studies. It's still in the works, so we'll let you know more about that when we get there, but it will not be breakout rooms. We'll have 3 separate links for webinars. And then another one just to help buildings that have number 2 or number 4 oil that specifically that are going to face compliance issues in 2025. I know there are a bunch of people signed up for this class that fall into that category. So since there's such little time for that, we will try and help you get over that hump. We don't have details on that yet, but we will announce it soon. It's going to be given by Dual Fuel Corp, who has helped a couple of the buildings that have been in this class. And that's it for us. Last slide, please. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. And we'll keep you posted on what's going on with the rules when they're finalized, and other times when we may need your help with advocacy to ensure co-ops and condos get the money that they need to comply with the regulations from the state and federal government. So thank you all very much, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.